All right, all. Now that we've learned a little bit about how to set up a composition, set up a project, let's actually, start to have a little bit of fun, start placing things around. So this is exercise 4, and what I'm going to do is just bring in some content. I'm going to go under File, Import, File. And I'm just going to bring in a couple of images here. All right, there's my images. This is my composition, which currently, let's just take a look at it, is should be set to 720 by 480 with a green background. So I got my content. These are images in this case. We're not going to deal with video at the moment. I want to get it into here, into my composition. How can I do that? So we have our toolbar here at the top. You can move this around. I'm going to grab the selection tool, and like it sounds like, it allows me to select something and to position it. So let's say I take this fish. I'm literally just going to grab it and then drag it. The gray wireframe kind of shows where the image is going to go, and there's my image. I'm going to take the heart, or let's take the kitty photo. Literally click, drag. Okay. Maybe I'll take this eagle, click and drag. So this is my composition. You can see it placed it. Now, let's say if I click on one of these images, you can see I get these little, I don't know what the correct term would be, but I call them little, these movement, boxes. These allow me to, if I click, I can click and literally drag and move this around. This allows me to scale. So if I click, you can see I'm scaling this down. So if I drag inward, I'm shrinking it. If I grab and drag it upward, I'm blowing it up or scaling it up, so to speak. Note that I can change the aspect ratio, so it could be I'm squashing it or stretching it. If you don't want to do that, if you click on these, what I really recommend doing is holding down Shift, and that should maintain the aspect ratio. Aspect ratio is the ratio between the width and the height. And so that means that the image will not be squashed or stretched or anything like that. All right. So I can play around with position. I can scale by clicking on these. You can also rotate these by up here in my toolbar. There's this thing that kind of looks like a reverse, arrow. That is my rotation tool. And if I click, you can see that I can rotate my shape as such. All right. So this is using the tools. I use the selection tool to change position and also to change scale. I use the rotation tool here to rotate. Um, what you have to understand is that in Adobe After Effects, sometimes we want to be more specific. Okay. And so what I mean by that is rather than using like a point and click interface like a selection tool or rotation tool, I can actually click on these and set a specific position, a specific height and width, and a specific rotation. Okay. First thing we're going to do is talk about position. Okay. I'm going to click on something. And actually, even before we talk about that, I don't know if let's talk about a coordinate plane. I don't mean to scare you, but basically any kind of computer graphics is always sort of based on at least basic levels of math. Okay. It's not super complicated maths. Don't get too scared. But you guys might remember something like this in high school, where this is a coordinate plane. Okay. And so this would be the center here would be 0, 0, if you remember. Let me blow this up actually. Yeah, let's do that. This is 0, 0. And then if I put This is the X direction, the X-axis, as we would call it. Normally, when people say the word X-axis, what they really mean is horizontal, especially in computer graphics. It technically doesn't have to mean that, but like 99% of the time, that's what they mean. Okay. And this is the vertical axis or the Y-axis. Okay. Once again, like technically it doesn't have to be the vertical, but 99% of the time when people say the y-axis, what they really mean is the vertical position of something or the vertical axis, the height of something or the position along the vertical point. Okay. So you might remember having something like where you would put a point in space and you'd give it an x and y value. So if I had this point here, I could say, okay, that point in space is at 2 in the x and 0 in the y, right? Or if I had something over here, you might say, okay, this is 0 in the x and 3 in the y, right? And this is this is how we come up with a point in space using math. Okay, this is called a coordinate plane. And we basically do the same thing. Let me get rid of this. In After Effects. So I'm going to turn off, don't worry about what I'm doing here. We'll talk about this later. But like, let's say I have this fish. Um, what I could do is I'm going to hit P for position. Okay. And if you see this number here, see how it says 186, 140. What does that really mean? Well, what After Effects is doing is it's actually setting the top left corner to be 0, 0. And the further you get to the right side, you're going to get a higher and higher x value. So for instance, if this is 0, this would be like 100x, 200x, 300x, so on and so on. Excuse my scribble. And then this is your y direction. Now, it's a little different than how you might remember it in math class. In math class, when you went up in a coordinate plane, it was positive, and when you went down, it was negative. For computers, it's the other way around. This is actually positive and this is negative. So here, when I go down in the y value here, so just to kind of give an idea, this would be, this would be 0. This is the y value here. This would be, these numbers are not to scale, but hopefully you kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. This is like 200, 300, 400, so on and so on. So what does all this really mean? Well, what it means is that the position of your fish from the center of this image, which is what this is, it's 186 pixels the the left side and 144 pixels down. Okay. So if I were to increase the X value by maybe making this 300, you can see how it moved it to the right. If I type this again, maybe 600, you can see it does that again. You can type in a value. You can also put your cursor here, and you might notice it has two little arrows here. And I could literally just kind of like slide it back and forth, which goes, sort of up and down one at a time. I think you can hold down shift and it would like go by increments of 10, which would make it go a little bit faster. And I could do the same thing here with Y, where if I increase the Y value, you can see it's going down. And if I go up, I'm actually, when I get to negative values, it actually pulls it up from its original location. So, I'm using X and Y values. Now you could type this out, or like I said, when you use this and literally just kind of do that, you can see it's automatically setting a X value and a Y value. Okay. I'm going to place it over here. I'm going to turn on Eagle. I'm going to hit P for position. If you don't do that, another way to do that is see this little unfurl button. I'm going to click on that and it says transform. And this is where you would see the position, the X value and the Y value. I'm just going to hit P to sort of hide the other stuff temporarily. It's just so you can kind of see it. And so once again, what does 92,312 mean, or 312? It means the center of my image is about 92 pixels from the left side and about 312 pixels from the top. Okay. If I increase this, just like with the fish, so a higher X value would put this on the right side, a lower X value would put it on the left side, a lower Y value would put it at the top. Sorry about that. Got a call there. So you can see how, the lower the Y value, it's kind of being hidden at the moment, but it's going up. Okay. So that's, position. What if we were doing scale? Remember how scale would increase or decrease? What I'm going to do is hit S, S for scale. So I'm doing this to the fish. Now, in this case, it says 100, 100. What does that really mean? Well, when they say 100, 100, what they're saying is 100% of the default width of the image or the video and 100% of the default height. So what we mean by that is when you save an image or you save a video on a computer, all of there's a built-in dimensions. Okay. So for instance, if I took this kitty picture and I'm on a Mac, so I can do and get info. It's a little different on a PC, but you can still get this information. Notice how under dimensions it says 480 by 320 right there. So what that would mean is at 100%, 100%, that would mean that 100% of 480 would mean the default's width is 480 and the default height is 320. Okay, so this is very dependent on whatever the default size of the image is. In this particular case of this puppy image is bigger. So 100% would be of 1920 would be 1920, and 100% of 1080 would be 1080. So this default size would be bigger than this default size. Okay. So when they talk about scale, it's all relative to whatever the original size of the image is. This is something you would set up when you were working in Photoshop or Photopea or in, Illustrator or whatever it is you were working with. If you increase this number, I could make this bigger or smaller. So if I say 200, what I'm saying here is whatever the default width is and whatever the default height is, make that twice its normal size. So in this case, I forgot what the default of this particular fish. Where's the fish? There it is. It's 320 by 213, so 200% of that would really be twice the size, or the width should now be 640 and the height should be 426. So if I click on this, I don't know if it says any dimensions anywhere. I have the literal amount. But anyway, it is making it, this composition is about 720, so you can see how it's taking up most of it. So you can see the width is now a lot bigger. If I set this to 50%, that would make it smaller than its original size. Okay, so by setting it to 50%, I'm making it half of its normal size, as opposed to twice. You might notice that by default, when I change one, I change the other, meaning if I change the width, I'm also changing the height and vice versa. That's because it's assuming that you want the video or the image to stay in ratio to each other. If you didn't do that, you could turn off this little link. And then what this now means is that you can change the aspect rate. You can change the width so that the width and height do not have to have the same percentages. Now, keep in mind when you do that, you are by definition going to squash or stretch it either horizontally or vertically. Okay. So if you don't want that, make sure that the width and height are actually the same number and not different numbers. And make sure this is kept on so that if you were to change one, you don't change the other. This is a little technical thing. If you're dealing with a raster image, a raster is an image built out of pixels like a JPEG or a PSD file. When you blow up a raster image, for instance, let me use the eagle. Let's say I blow up this eagle to be about, I don't know, 3 times its normal size, 4 times. When you blow up a raster image, it starts to distort. Anytime you get above 100%, it will start to get distorted. That means it starts to get a little bit blurry around the edges and get a little, get a little, what we call stair stepping, anti-aliasing. This is because of how raster images work. There's really nothing you can do. Maybe there's some AI stuff you could do, but in general, this is just how raster images work. So I don't really recommend blowing up anything that's raster based, which would mean any image built out of pixels, like built in Photoshop or something, or even video. Video is also raster based. So blowing it up might cause some distortion, a little bit of blurriness and that kind of stuff. That is not an issue with vector files. So for instance, if I brought in this vector file here, and I brought this into our project, let me change the background settings so it's a little easier to see. I'm going to take this and blow it up to be like 1,000%. So thousand, or it's not 1,000. Now it's going to be there. Oops, whoa. Well, that's 9,000 times. Let's do it. There you go. This is 9 times its normal size. And you can see that it still looks nice and crisp because vectors do not distort when you blow them up. Okay. This is something we'll play around with more later, but just note that this is if you bring in, say, an image from Photoshop, like a JPEG or a PNG file or something like that. Just note that if you do scale them above 100%, there will be some distortion depending on how much you blow it up. So normally I don't recommend it unless you have to. All right, so we got position, we got scale. We also have rotation. You can hit R for rotation, where you're going to unfurl this and you can see the rotation right there. The way the rotation works in Adobe After Effects is it treats your composition, your image or your video like it's a circle, okay? And so its default is to be right side up, which is considered 0 degrees. If you turn it on its side, that's 90 degrees. If you flip it upside down, that is 180 degrees. And if you did like a 3/4 turn, that would be 270 degrees. And then if it did a full loop, which we'll get into later when we animate, that would be back to 360 degrees. Okay. So let's say I have this image here and I'm going to hit R for rotation. And this represents degrees. This is the number of rotations, which right now is not going to be an issue. We're not going to deal with that. But if I click on this, I could hit 90, and you can see it flipped it on its side. If I typed in 180, it flips it upside down. So just note that you can rotate it a certain number of degrees to rotate that. And, using the rotation tool is the same thing. You can see that as I rotate it, it is rotating the object. So whether you decide to use, the selection tool and the rotation tool to manually do it, or you want to be a little bit more specific and use the options here, like the position, note that they both do the same thing. It's just letting you kind of see, I would argue that this one's a little bit more specific, but it's kind of your choice there. Okay. All right, one more thing. Let's talk about layers. All right, so I got three items here. I got a fish, I have a cat, and I have a pineapple. Okay. This is my timeline. And the way it works is we have something called layers. Okay. Layers are literally the stacking order of how all of your items in your composition are. Okay. So what I want you to do is imagine your composition like it's a collage on your table. Okay, I'm sitting at a dining room table right now. Imagine like the pineapple is on the bottom. We're like looking at this at like a 3/4 view. Okay, this is pineapple, P for pineapple. And then on top of that is the kitty image. So it's like, think of it as like a magazine cutout or something where it's like sitting on top. Okay, and this is my base layer, this is my next layer, and then the fish image is on top of those two. I'm just going to put it as F for fish. Okay. So this is my layer stack. Pineapple, kitty, fish. Okay. And so the fish is never blocked because it's on top of the stack. And then, because this is on top, it blocks the kitty image. The kitty image blocks the pineapple. Okay. At any point, though, you could always reorder this. So, for instance, if I take this, I can literally drag it up. See that blue line? That blue line represents its new location in the stack. If I drag it to the top, now the pineapple is on top. And so you can block the other items here. Or I can put the fish on, or I can take the kitty on top. Click, drag it up. Notice that sometimes when you do that, it will block items. So for instance, my kitty is actually blocking, I could block the entire fish. So just be careful, or not be careful, but just be aware that, by reordering things, you may block other items. So I don't know. Let me bring in something else. Maybe I'm going to bring in the balloon. Let's put in the balloon. And maybe I want the balloon behind the kitty for some reason. I will take the balloon and put it behind the kitty, which in this case it would be at the bottom. Okay. Maybe I want it behind the kitty, but in front of the fish. So the fish should really go, there you go. So now it would be like behind the cat, but in front of the fish. Okay, by the order here. A couple other things to be aware of. Once you start, you can see these items in my layer. Let's say I wanted to let's say I want to remove something from my composition. So if you don't like something, you can literally just kind of highlight it, right click. Actually, I'm just going to hit the delete button or the backspace button. You can see it removes it from my composition. I'm sure there's a way to do that through the thing, but I couldn't remember. Another way, so let's say you wanted to keep something. Let's say I want to turn off an item to see what my composition looks like, but I don't want to delete it. What I could do is over here on the far left, this little eye icon is called the visibility toggle, and it lets me turn content on and off. So let's say I click on this, I can turn off the fish, but I don't delete it from my composition. At any point, I can always go back and turn it on. Okay. So if you want to turn off a bunch of stuff, you can actually just kind of click and drag with your finger, and it's kind of a quick, easy way to turn all these on and off. Um, if you have a lot of items, for instance, let's say I have 4 items here. Let's just say I just want to look at one layer and turn all the other ones off. An easy way to do this is what's called soloing, this little white circle here. If you solo a layer, basically what it does is it automatically turns off all the other layers, but does not delete them. So for instance, if I click on the little empty box here for fish, see how it turns off all the others temporarily, and then I click back on this and they all come back. If I click on kitty for the solo, it will solo that, put it all together, so on and so on. Okay. Finally, the last thing we can do is do what's called locking. Locking means that you lock the properties of that layer. So for instance, let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm going to click lock here. A little lock icon shows up, and that now means that I cannot select that pineapple, which means I can't change its position, I can't rotate it, I can't scale it. But the other ones I would be able to do that because they're not locked. To unlock it, simply click back on the lock icon, and then that would allow me to edit my composition like that. Okay? All right, why don't you guys try that out? That was 4 and 5, please.